Good afternoon. My name is Teresa Moulton, and I'm the editor-in-chief of the Change Management Review. Welcome to our webinar, Establishing and Evaluating the Change Center of Excellence. So the way that we're going to go through the material is I will present it and highlight the questions that were submitted previously to the session, and then I'll leave some time at the end of the session as well to take some questions. And without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started. Okay, so today what we're going to talk about is a shared, curated perspective for understanding CCOEs. And CCOE stands for Change Center of Excellence. We're going to provide a framework for your team's conversation about how to establish and evaluate a CCOE, and we're going to address as many pre-session questions as possible as we go through this. So what is a Center of Excellence? A Center of Excellence is a corporate or organizational competency center, and basically it's used by organizations to actually install and realize a new technology or skill and manage its adoption. So you've probably heard of Centers of Excellence for Quality, maybe it's Six Sigma, maybe it's Agile. In the 80s and 90s, it was Total Quality Management. And basically what's important to know about the Change Center of Excellence is that we're actually putting in place the content that's needed to roll out a Center of Excellence. So when we talk about a Change Center of Excellence, we're not only talking about what the change management capability is, but we're also talking about the plan to roll it out. So here's some interesting information from ProSci's webinar, and they're citing their pre-2017 data. It looks like it's going to be a great report, and I think it normally comes out in March. That might be something of interest to you. But here it is, 40% of the organizations across all industries have a change management office or functional group for change management. 39 to 66% of these organizations realized an increased success rate of change from 39 to 66%. Now this is based on ProSci's maturity model, which has 5 stages in it. So the lowest stage, level 1, got a 39% increase in the rate of change success, and then the more mature change functions on their model, level 5, got a 66% increase change rate of success. So this is pretty significant work. You can see just from these numbers that there is a multiplier effect to pulling together the change capability across an organization and actually getting, your investment back. Also, a Change Center of Excellence is expected to be the number 2 trend in the change discipline over the next 5 years. So we're talking about something that's really starting to move forward in the industry. And what's important to keep in mind is that we are looking at building a capability that is going to help organizations improve their competitive and strategic advantage. So those are some of the key stats from the ProSci information. So why do we want a CCOE? These are some of the basic tenets of your business case for why a CCOE. We've just talked about increasing the rate of change success. We also want to increase the ROI on major change initiatives. So there's a lot to be said about having the right tools and the right approaches and the right people doing the work so that you can increase the ROI on major change initiatives. We want to strengthen an organization's change muscle, and what that means is we're not just talking about installing a methodology and process for doing the work. We're actually talking about what the total strength of change capability looks like in the organization. So for example, are your change leaders able and capable of leading change? Does your change network function as a true set of change agents? Those types of things that are less about a methodology and less about practices that are specific to the Center of Excellence. We want to improve the trust in the organizational leadership, and that's what happens is I'm sure everybody's been in a company where projects have failed, and that particular failed project becomes the history that prevents other change initiatives from moving forward. And what happens when you put in a change center of excellence is you have that focused capability, not only increasing the success rate of the initiatives that it's supporting, but also really focusing on the brand of change management within the organization. And that positioning and brand is critical to success, to realize as much as an organization can about its change capability. And we talked about increased competitive advantage in the market. And this is important to note because what happens, as you know, but I don't know that we all focus on it all the time, is that when the company sets goals and objectives and then breaks it down into strategic initiatives to achieve those goals and objectives, we basically grab the initiatives and start thinking about, well, how do we make this happen? What doesn't always cross our mind is that the project budget that we're given is actually an investment in the company's strategy. So we can look at a project and say, well, we're going to get it right. We need to do it right because we want it to succeed and we want to be known for running successful projects. But what's also important to note is that the more successful and the more of successful projects you have, the more able the company is to actually improve its competitive advantage because you're helping it reach its goals and objectives. So putting a change center for excellence in place really does provide foundation for reaching competitive advantage. So how do you know you need a change center for excellence? Well, you might be in an organization where the projects aren't going so well, people are resisting change, and now we're going to throw more resources at it. Eventually you run out of resources and chaos ensues. There might be multiple projects working across an organization with different methodologies, terminology, and nomenclature. There's nothing more frustrating, at least to me based on my experience as a practitioner, there's nothing more frustrating than trying to implement an enterprise-wide project and running into stakeholder groups with multiple different methodologies and constructs for understanding change. And in fact, in your change management plan, if that's the case, you need to plan in some time for your stakeholders to get educated and adjust to the new constructs that you're rolling out in your methodology and your approach. You know, a lot of the time expected results are out of the alignment with organizational change reality, and that includes lack of buy-in from key stakeholders, but it really also more often lately seems to be an overwhelmed culture at a high level of change saturation. So if we're really trying to get ahead of the change curve here ourselves, we really need to put in place a center of change excellence that is going to help us measure and monitor change saturation. You might also see that there's no one person in the organization who's responsible for change management. There's no portfolio view of the different projects where change management is needed. Change management practitioners are operating at various and untracked levels of capability. So what I've observed lately is unless you're hiring, you know, a consulting company to come in and do the work for you, then you are really depending on recruiters and the interview process to have your change practitioners come in the door. And believe it or not, change management is a profession where we're just starting to formalize our hiring, you know, practices, our certifications, our associations and accreditations. So hiring managers and recruiters aren't yet savvy enough to know the difference between someone who can practice change and someone who has the credentials and some experience. So it's important that we start to pay attention to the fact that understanding the practitioner's ability to actually deliver the work at various levels in the organization is a really important factor. We also find out that change management is not consistently positioned on projects and initiatives. So you might have resistance from one project sponsor saying, we hate the word change management, we don't want to use that word, and so the project agrees to call it communication, or the project agrees to call it training, or training and communication. So the terminology around change management is something to take into consideration as well. Some of the other terms for this type of work can be strategy execution, but you need to redefine, again, what your terminology is and make it palatable to your organizational culture. Also, you might see that managers do not have the competency to lead change. So that's a common one, especially with the number of turnover going on in organizations today. People are typically staying in companies for about 18 months. It used to be 3 years. Prior to that, it was 5. And I'd say, 20, 30 years ago, it was 30 years. So as people become more fluid, they're bringing with them or not bringing with them the capability to lead change. So that's something that has to be consistent in your processes for strengthening the organizational change muscle. So that people, no matter where they're coming in and going to, when they're working on projects with you, when they're leading them, they actually have the skills and ability to do that. Sponsors are inconsistent in what they say and do. There might not be a change network that's functioning as a networked group of change agents. Instead, it may be functioning solely as a communication group that just disseminates outgoing information but doesn't actually get involved in helping the organization that they're a part of manage the change that's happening. And in a lot of cases, what I find is that the change network is in place and it is used mostly for outbound communication, where it needs to be more focused on receiving information as well. So it's a two-way street. And then the whole change agentry piece for each person in the network is like the next level where you're really starting to mature your organization. The organization is saturated with change. We talked about that. Projects are unsuccessful and don't meet their desired results. And it's difficult or impossible to understand the ROI on change management. So you can see the different spikes of issues and types of concepts and realities that come together and really cry for a focused capability on change management. So the CCOE functions through 5 gateways. One is strategy, one is positioning, one is people, one is process, and one is organization. Now, what I like to say is, and this is probably part of my serial entrepreneurial background, is we're building a business within a business, right? So if you think about that, a business has a marketing strategy, it has, a finance strategy, an operations strategy, it has an HR strategy, and it has actually leadership and strategy. So when we think about building a change center of excellence, we can interpolate the business model concept into how we build a change function, and that's what we're going to do next. So in terms of strategy, people see the word strategy and they think, oh, well, I'll assume somebody else is going to have that and I'll just get the work done. But in order for an organization to actually tell if it's successful or not with the investment it's making in change management, we have to be really clear about what the purpose of the CCOE is. Is it to reduce risk in the project portfolio? Is it to improve the reputation of the project work in the organization? Is the Change Center of Excellence going to focus on project work at a detailed level and implementation support, or is it also going to work at more of a strategic level and transform the organization? Those are some of the things that you need to think about when you're putting together your strategy for your Change Center of Excellence. Positioning is one of my favorite ones because in terms of positioning, we're not just talking about where the organization lives, though that is important. We're also talking about how is the organization going to be perceived? Is it going to be, well respected? How much influence does it have across the company? And that starts, of course, with the positioning of where the function lives. And one of the things that I find interesting is that people get caught up with what the function is going to be called versus where it's positioned in the organization. And as you know, to have authority and influence, the higher up the organization you go, or the higher up the organization you go and the more aligned you are with how the authority and influence flows through the company, the better idea you have of where you want to locate your center of change excellence. So what I usually recommend to people is that you want to position the center of change excellence in alignment with the scope of the work that you're trying to complete and influence. So for example, if you have a PMO that is operating at the tactical level in an organization and it's only within one function, and the rest of the organization isn't doing change management and it's too hard to influence it and get it to be an enterprise-wide capability, you can have a change center of excellence in technology, but it's pretty much going to influence mostly the project work around that technology and the stakeholders with it. If you want to transform an organization, then you really need to have the Change Center of Excellence located pretty much reporting to one of the direct reports to the CEO. And what is interesting from the ProSci research is that right now, PMOs are where the Change Center of Excellence lives. So 32% of the folks interviewed and researched from the ProSci 2017 study, 32% of them say that their Change Center of Excellence lives in the PMO. And then 30% say it lives in HR, 20% says it lives in IT, 20% has it in the business units, and 19% has it in strategy and transformation. Now, what's interesting to me is where the research participants say that the Change Center of Excellence should live. They say it should live in the PMO and it should live in the strategy transformation space. So, you know, it really does matter on where the influence and the authority in your organization is going relative to the scope and mix of work projects that you're trying to get achieved. So we had a question that came in before the webinar today, and it was, how should the CCOE interface with the PMO? And that's a common question that I hear a lot. And one of the things to keep in mind is to ask the question, what's the PMO doing? If the PMO is operating as the project portfolio, and then what you might want to do is look at the profile of one of the projects that they're monitoring and measuring, and just check in to see, you know, are they monitoring and measuring on each project the change readiness, the change saturation, the level of change impact, and you know, the expected returns from change management on those projects. If those 4 pieces of data are not being addressed in their project profile within their portfolio, then the Change Center of Excellence, no matter where it lives, can provide that information to the PMO. I think what's most important to most organizations is that there's one source of truth, and so that they're getting their portfolio view from one place. If the CCOE is going to partner with the PMO and create that well-rounded scope of portfolio management information, then that's fine. If there is no PMO and there is no portfolio of projects, then the CCOE can definitely create the change portfolio body of work for itself, and probably needs to do that in order to be able to measure a lot of what is important in terms of project ROIs and success metrics. The next piece is organization, and you know, one thing that one of my mentors said to me is, you know, Terry, a CCOE is just a version of a dedicated function. So, you know, we're talking about basically anywhere from one person to a group of people owning the change management capability for an organization. And that ownership can be deployed across business units, across other functions, across geographies. And that's what we talk about with centralized, decentralized versus hybrid. And you can figure out, how much of the hybrid model you want to employ based on how the authority and influence flows down into the organization. So for example, if the business units make their own decisions and get their own budget, they may just want the standardized tools and some coaching and guidance from this Change Center of Excellence and how they do their project work. Otherwise, they may have actually a dedicated change resource in their business unit, and they may have a mini Change Center of Excellence just for their business unit. So I've seen it structured where it's, from one person being in a business unit to a smaller Change Center of Excellence within a business unit, coordinating with a larger change corporate headquarters Change Center of Excellence. I've seen it work that way, and also just deploying, one person to a function or a region. So it really depends on what types of work you have, the budget that you have to work within, and how much standardization the Center of Excellence can provide that the rest of the company can leverage. So those are the things that influence the decision to centralize or decentralize the CCOE. Now we talk about processes. So in a company, in a business within a business, processes often lie in operations technically, but in reality they're across all functions in today's business world. Well, in a COE, what we're talking about is where do the processes to activate and deploy and measure change management work live? And one of the questions that I got before the session is, we're a pro-size shop. Does this approach impact, the fact that we're using their methodology? And the answer is no. There's actually, globally, last time I checked, about 34 different methodologies for change management. And so any one of those toolkits and approach can sit under the concept that I'm presenting here. What's really important is that we're looking at a bit of standardization. We're looking at adoption of a common set of tools and practices, and we're looking at leveraging all of the different components of a change management capability that's going to help integrate change management into the organization. So for example, training, we're talking about not only change network training, but we're talking about the professional development of the change practitioners within the Change Center of Excellence. Mentoring and coaching comes in the maturity model of a Change Center of Excellence. Basically, as you start moving and getting more mature, the different practitioners who are out in the business units or out on projects or out in different geographies, they can benefit from more mentoring and coaching as they do their work. You might not start with mentoring and coaching if you're just at the very basic level of your Center of Excellence right now. The change network is can be seen both in the people bucket as well as the process bucket, but the process bucket of the change network means that we actually know how we're managing the change network. We know the logistics, the communication, how it meets, what it does, all that kind of stuff. And then if you look at the people bucket of the change network, that's what skill sets do they need to in place to be a good change agent, how many of them do we need, that kind of stuff. And the other part that I think people underlook is relationship management within the organization, because if you think of the business within a business model, businesses have salespeople. And in large companies, as you know, there's business unit relationship managers. It's no different with the change function. So there has to be the competency of relationship management with program managers and the executives and sponsors of all the different projects where change resources are deployed. And that's important not just while the project's going on, but also to build in advance and sustain afterwards, so that you're constantly managing the expectations of what this Change Center of Excellence does and who it's accountable to, what its brand is, and you're building its influence so that when an organization does need the change management capability, it knows how to engage with you. So it's not just about program management and project management. It's about educating the internal customer about what this group does and how it functions, and then how to get in contact with you when they need you. Communication with stakeholders, I think we're familiar with that, but there may be communication venues that you've set up for one enterprise-wide project that you can leverage for other ones. So the management and oversight of that might be in the Change Center of Excellence, or there's an approach for how to do that, and that's leveraged in the Change Center of Excellence. The service delivery model is important to consider because, depending on what stage of maturity you're in, you might be actually placing people on projects to do that work, or you may be placing people, allocating them to projects to coach that work. And it's important to know what service delivery model you're operating in, because one of the things that is most common is we get too few change resources allocated to too many projects. And I'm sure if I asked for a show of hands on how common that was, we would definitely get a lot of hands coming up. In one of my booths, we sponsored the 2015 and 16 ACMP Global Conference, and as I was sitting in my booth, people would kind of float through, and I would say to them, so how's it going for you? What's your number one concern? And they would say, there's too much work, and I feel like I'm powerless to manage the expectations around how much of myself I can dedicate to all these projects. So you can actually hit that up front by having a solid service delivery model, so that the relationship managers and your internal consultants, change practitioners, can actively manage expectations of what they will do and what they won't do for a given project. And then, of course, there's the oversight and maintenance of the change portfolio and the metrics to measure not just the impact of the portfolio, but the impact of the capability and how the Change Center of Excellence is operating and performing. So think of it this way, we're building a capability or a function within a company. Every other function has to set goals and objectives and meet certain standards to deliver certain results. So will the Change Center of Excellence. So I think right now there's a lot of focus on the change portfolio, the mix of projects, change saturation, change readiness, change impact analysis, all that kind of stuff, which is really important. But we're forgetting about the fact that the company has invested money in a change management capability, and they need to know what their ROI is on that overall capability. And it's not just the results of the project portfolio. There's a lot of other things that you need to consider in terms of making that equation work. So I think leveraging the existing change agent network, that was a question that came in, and I spent some time talking about this already, so I'm going to move to the next slide, I think. So people, we talked about this at the beginning of the presentation, and I just want to reiterate that much as we love job descriptions, they aren't necessarily coming with a skill level assessment. So, you may have someone who's called a change lead at one organization and someone who's called a change manager at another organization, or someone who's called the director of project change in another organization, and they may have the same skill set, or they may have very different skill sets. And what's most important is to match the skill sets to the complexity of the work that they're going to be doing, along with obviously the competencies they bring to the table. But another perspective is to make sure you don't forget about the big picture, because when you're looking at a center of change excellence, you want to make sure that you can see what your resource mix looks like. So how much resource do you have in place that can really handle and facilitate transformation versus working on communication plans and stakeholder analyses in the mechanics of the project itself. They're all important, but you've got to have the right mix of skill sets in order to align with the mix of project work that you're trying to achieve. Not rocket science, but I find that when people are under fire to get a project staffed, they're looking at that project. They're using resumes and an interview only to get people into that project so they can get the work, moving forward, which makes sense. We've all done it. But they're not looking at the overall change capability and how that person's skill mix impacts the overall skill portfolio of the Center of Change Excellence. And then the other thing is that, there's no real assessment of the person's skill set. So you're taking a risk that investment of that skill set is actually what the project needs, and you're expecting to get those results. So those are just some of the things that, as you start to formalize a change management capability within your company, that you need to take into consideration when you start. So how many change practitioners do you need? Well, that's the consultative it depends answer. And what we're talking about here is, as I mentioned before, you can start with one person, but it's really dependent on how much capability in the Center of Excellence you need to maintain and sustain. So you might need people to, maintain and oversee the change management training program for the professional development of your practitioners. You might need someone, to have part of their job manage the change management network, and those things aren't even accounted for on projects. So there's, basically how do you keep the function going, and then there's how do you deploy on the work. So again, it also depends on your service delivery model. Are you providing coaching to the projects? Are you actually staffing the projects? And one thing you could use as a model might be an internal consulting organization, because that's another model that the Center for Change Excellence can function as. So you just need to be clear: are we functioning as an internal consulting organization? Are we offering just really the place where we're going to centralize all and standardize all the methods and tools and practices? Are we also in charge of measuring it? So there's lots of different items that a Center of Excellence in Change Management perform. And the second question here is there a standard to benchmark the skill set for members of the CCOE? And the answer is no, there isn't one. I did have a call with the Change Management Institute last night, and they have a competency model for change practitioners, which they're offering to their membership. So that exists. And I know there are some other competency models out there, but I haven't seen too many that look at the full set of change practitioner skill sets. So I think that's a place that we need to go in terms of our discipline itself. Another question: who in the organization should be engaged to effectively launch a CCOE? Anybody impacted by it. So that's part of the question about, that you need. What do I need to roll out and standardize a Center of Change Excellence across my organization? And my answer is, think of it as a project. Think of it as an enterprise-wide implementation. Think of it as a transformation, and that you're really going to be impacting the culture of the larger company. So you want to have representation from everybody who's going to be impacted by the projects that the organization does, as well as the capability that's going to be utilized. And the next question was, how dedicated do the resources need to be? Again, that comes back to how many change practitioners do you need? Volume of work, level of skill set, type of work, complexity of work, availability of resources. So those are the things that typically go into the people side. So just a very simple maturity framework. I'm working on another one that's going to be a diagnostic. So I'm working with a partner on this, partner organization on this, and we're going to be beta testing our diagnostic in Q1 of 2018. So if you're interested in perhaps having your organization participate in our beta test of our IP, then you can get in on the ground floor, and even if you're just about to start your COE planning, you can get an initial assessment so that you're going in the right direction up front. And if you've already started one, you can get a checkup, what I call an organizational checkup, and we can, again, come in with our model and assessments and see where you are and help you paint the best roadmap for moving forward. So again, just email me if you're interested in going to the next level on the framework. But for this presentation, I wanted to keep it simple so that we could see the differentiation between the factors and the dimensions of the model at the beginning basic stage, in the middle at the operational stage, and at the more mature nimble stage of a change center of excellence. So here's an eye chart for you. It's not you know, it's not really rocket science, but it does start to discern some of the differences between a more mature, nimble organization with a very well embedded change management capability versus one that's just starting. And so if you look at the strategy boxes, you can see there's a different mix between high tactical support, so more of the implementation at the project level, versus the facilitation of transformational change, strategic support at the top of the organization. That's going to depend on where the Center of Excellence is positioned. We talked about that. So, you know, is the Center of Excellence subsumed within the PMO or just doing project work? And I don't mean that in a judgmental way, because we need to do the basics of our work in everything that we do. We need to do our assessments, our cultural assessment, our change readiness assessment, our stakeholder analysis. We need to do all of that work. It's just that if we do it on a scope of a project that's more narrow than enterprise-wide, you know, our reputation and our influence is going to be contained to the scope of that work. If we build a change center of excellence that's broad and goes across the enterprise, and even if it works on a lot of projects and different functions, but the projects themselves are narrow within those functions, we're still expanding the change management center of excellence capability across the company. So it's important to know where it's positioned. Another thing that people don't pay attention to as much anymore, it was big in the 90s with re-engineering, is branding projects. So, you know, I think people come up with a name or something like that. But for a center of excellence, you really want to have a logo, you really want to have a name, you really want to have the tagline, you really want to have your service delivery model that supports your brand in place. And you can see how that grows over time as well. In terms of organization, you could see that distributed, centralized, hybrid, that pretty much doesn't matter in terms of maturity. It's really just what organizational structure is going to best leverage the authority and influence of your center of excellence across the company. So you probably have some alignment with how the company is structured, and that's important. In terms of processes, in the initial phase, you know, there may be no formal change management method in place, no formal means of deploying and growing a change management method, and all the way up to, yes, we have one standard, we all know what to call it, everybody has been trained on it, our sponsors are able and capable to lead change and manage expectations, what they say and do is in alignment, our change leadership capability in our organization is strong, and if all those things are in place, then remember the numbers at the beginning of the presentation. In the more mature organizations, using the ProSci information, you can have up to a 66% increase in the rate of success for implementing change when you have a more mature change management capability or center of excellence in your company. But popping back to the beginning, the initial model, I think we got a lot of questions about, you know, my company is not really big on change management yet. I'm here, but we haven't really got a lot of momentum in moving it forward in the organization. How can I sell them on starting a center of excellence in change management? And one of my key points is you may not be ready for a center of excellence in change management. You may be at the, you know, start to educate them on what change management is, apply it to a few projects, measure the results, bring it back. You may have to go through this growth process of maturing the capability before you can actually put it into a bigger vision. Or you may have an organization where the CEO gets it and the rest of the organization doesn't get it, but they're going to fund you to build a center of excellence. And in that case, it's just another big transformational enterprise project that you need to take on. You can see with the people piece, we're talking about really in the initial phase, no clear roles or responsibilities for practitioners, change agents, or sponsors. And that's really important because often on projects, change management projects, we take the time to craft out and define the roles for sponsors, the roles for change agents, the roles for the practitioners, and everybody else who's on the project team. But when we have a change function, it's important not to forget to expand that to a broader view so that as you're building your change muscle in your organization, the ability of your sponsors to lead and sponsor change, and the ability of your change network, the ability and capability of your change leadership is all growing as well. And it's not just one project specific, it's the whole organization. So if you want to think about the big picture in terms of the statement we talked about at the beginning of the presentation, where we said that having a change center of excellence impacts the competitive advantage of a company, then that's when we're talking about organizational change muscles. We're talking about components of the core competency or the strategic capability called change management that doesn't reside only in projects. It becomes built into the rest of the organization and the people who play a part in change work. So that's the high-level maturity framework, and as I had mentioned before, I'm working on a more detailed one that's going to be technically solidified as a diagnostic, and all the requisite component assessments will be there. And if your organization's entering into this type of work and you want to get ahead on it or talk to us about working on it, please do get in touch with me. Okay, so let's keep it simple. An approach for building a CCOE. Basically, we're going to use the framework that I presented before, and we're going to decide where we are on the change management maturity framework, what is currently in place, and here's just a bulleted list of some of the things you look at, the bigger levers in determining where you are in terms of your capability for change management. It's important to note that it does typically take 3 to 5 years to build a new function and to realize its full potential. You can go faster depending, how much capability you put in place, but you can't force adoption on anything. So just keep in mind, if you set an annual goal to put one of these in place, you might be putting it in place and getting it partially operational, and that's okay. It's just going to take time to evolve the capability over time. So it's a simple gap analysis. You decide what you're going to build by using the change management maturity framework, and then you identify what is required to achieve the role of the CCOE. And this is, I think, important. It can be helpful to get periodic external checkups, and I don't necessarily mean by consultants. It can be someone who's external to your organization, or someone who runs a different center of excellence in your company. They could come in and help do a checkup with you quarterly for the first year that you're getting going. But what is important is not to just go off to the races and forget to see how you're doing, because you won't have the information that you need to shift along the way as the capability grows. So here, one question that I got is, a couple times is, where do I start? How do you start building a change center of excellence? And the most important thing is basically getting the buy-in and executive level support that you need in order to roll the change center of excellence out at the enterprise level or at the functional level, but being clear about what it will, what it won't do, and what it can influence and what it can't influence. And then once you have that really solidified, you start to look at your standards. What standards do you need in place? What kind of training and tools do you need in place? What does your current project work mix look like? What's the future project work mix look like? And how are you going to measure that you got there? Not just the metrics on the portfolio of projects or on each project, but this is an actual project. So putting in a center of change excellence is a project. So we need to understand how this investment in this capability actually stands up. You need skilled practitioners, capable change leaders, capable sponsors. Some people start by saying, I got to hire some people who are experts to help me do this. That's fine. But the real key is, as in any change project, as you know, is building the case for change and the business case for the CCOE. And you'll see a little bit later on that we're going to be covering that information in a set of series about how to build the change management function starting next year. So here's some other pre-session questions that we got. How do I build buy-in for a CCOE? What is the business case, like I just mentioned? How do you scale a CCOE across the organization? What are the metrics for a CCOE? What are some examples of working CCOEs? Should the CCOE be responsible for building resilience? That's an interesting one. So, we want to help the organization be able to change and build this capability for getting kind of hammered with all these projects, and help individuals really understand, what they're made of and what their choices are. So that was an interesting question, and I think we can explore more. How do you brand a CCOE? How do you assess CCOE practitioner skill level? And how do you manage a change portfolio? So we're going to take this topic list and we're going to break it into individual webinars throughout 2018 and take one on at a time. Evaluating the CCOE, here's a checklist to consider. I'm not going to read through all of them, but everything that we talked about is in there. And this is something that when you're sitting down to either check in on where your current Change Center of Excellence is, or you're trying to put your business case together for what your Change Center of Excellence will be, this is the type of list you need to think about, all the different conversations that you need to have with folks in order to pull it all together. And this is irrespective of what level of change maturity your organization is in right now. So the summary is, don't choose or succumb to chaos. Change management is too important to punt. Start where you are. You can start with one person. And an example of that is basically having one person start to build the buy-in, or having one person start to look at different methodologies and select the one that they want, or decide to build one inside. So anything that's already been done to contribute to building change management competency can be included and should be leveraged in the Center of Excellence. We talked about getting a checkup to stay aligned with the results that need to be realized by the Center of Excellence, not just the project portfolio. Methodology alone is not the answer. So methodology is really only one small component of building a Change Center of Excellence. As you noticed on the roadmap before, we basically, I want to go back to that slide. If you look at the second group of information here, the second flag on the roadmap, standard methodology practice and practices is one component of the process stuff, but you need the training, the tools, the project work mix really defined, and you need good metrics as well. So it's not just about the methodology, it's about the practitioners, it's about the positioning, it's about the influence of the organization, your established brand, and what your momentum and credibility looks like in getting this work done. Certification doesn't equal competence, and I don't say this because I don't believe in certification. I do believe in certification, and I think it's a important next direction for the discipline to be going in. I just think it's important for folks to realize that this isn't one of those things where you just decide that you're going to be an X and you go to a 3-day class and you become an X. You go to a course, you take your course, you pass your course, and then you go for an accreditation with one of the associations out there. And then you have experience, you have project failures, you have lessons learned from other people. You need the failures and the lessons learned to actually practice this work. And that's what the recruiting industry for change management doesn't quite understand yet. So again, positioning of the new entity is critical. You want to go as high up as you can for transformational change. And in fact, if you're putting in an enterprise-wide capability and you're not reporting to one of the direct reports of the CEO, you probably want to put a stop to the project, because you're not going to be able to get the transformation metrics that you're going to want at that point, unless there's a very strong network and precedent for that in the organization. And you need to have an internal brand. So it sounds kind of intangible, and it is, but it's something that you really need to put in place to get the full bang for your buck on your investment in this. So I think we're ready to take some questions. And let's see here. Yeah, we have about 10 minutes. So let me go over and get those ready. Okay, so what do we have for questions? We've got lots of yeses, so I think that's good. That means people were supporting the points. That's always a good thing when you're presenting a webinar. Any other questions? Okay. Let's see. Bob says yes with 2 E's. Question about when the presentation will be available. I will make it available, and the webinar itself will be available via link after the presentation as well. What other type of professional development is suggested for change practitioners? Consulting skills training. Hello. I mean, this is really interesting to me because, and I don't mean that in a judgmental way, but we don't get enough consulting skills training. So this is where we need to lean on our OD colleagues and say, you know, give me some of those soft skills so that I can better manage expectations, I can have crucial conversations, I can actually coach my project colleagues, I can coach my sponsors, I can, you know, move more nimbly within the organization. So get your methodology in place so you understand the basics. Get your certification if that matters to you and the people that who you work with, and then take the time to do those classes that you can, you know, maybe do online, or go participate in one of your OD learning groups locally and build some of those soft skills, because that's what's missing. What else? Have to log off. Got it. Thanks for coming. Any other questions? Don't be shy. I can go back to my list of questions if we need to. Do you have any case studies on the topic? That came up before. I do have case studies. I don't have company permission yet to present them, but that's going to be one of the follow-on webinars that we're going to do. I'm going to work with those companies to have them present their case studies on this, which I think will add a lot of value for you. How many companies have them? So 40% of companies across all industries have some sort of CMO, change management office, or functional capability in place. Another, I have to go, thank you, no problem. By leadership, I mean supervisors, first and second line, not execs. Arliss, any other tips to get leadership engaged? And then by leadership, I mean supervisors, first and second line, and not execs. Yes, actually, you know, our coaching colleagues have an awesome practice called group coaching. And sometimes, you know, it happens in a training course. and sometimes it happens one-off, but really helping supervisors and managers get some of that intimate time with an expert who can help them with their soft skills will make a huge difference. Also, it's important to bring the expectations that the company has for supervisors and managers about leading change. What do they expect these people to be able to do? You can engage HR in this because it's often, change leadership is often part of a performance management program, and if you can get HR educated on what it means to lead change and then work with them to deliver some of that information to your mid and lower level managers, you'll get a lot out of that. Some organizations seem to be dissolving CCE's comments. Yes, actually, you know, that's an old practice from TQM Centers of Excellence or Knowledge Management Centers of Excellence. Sometimes, you know, I had a client where they formed a center of excellence and they said its lifespan is 7 years. And in 7 years, we're going to plan to dissolve it into the business units. Again, that comes back to the strategy. So when you think about building a center of excellence, yes, it's a different type of function. One of the differences is it's built to actually roll out a certain technology or skill set into an organization. Once the organization builds that competency, you can use that capability to build a center of excellence on another type of technology or skill set. In some companies, it lives forever. But I think that's a really great point. Let's see. My executive sponsor will be retiring next week. God bless you. How would you suggest I go about getting another executive sponsor? I have key leaders committed to change management, but none positioned at the enterprise level to be an ideal executive sponsor. You know, I think you might want to start going around, make your deck and get your selling deck set up to position the case for a change management center of excellence or building the change management capability, and you want to start doing your socializing with that immediately. And if there's relationships that your current executive sponsor has that they can set up for you right now, that's probably a good thing to do. Is prolonged changes of behavior crucial to sustain change, crucial to success? So is prolonged changes of behavior in people needed to sustain crucial to success? Yes, prolonged changes in behavior are definitely necessary because when you think about going in the from to, you want to go into the new world and operate in the new world. So whether that's with or without a change center of excellence, or it's, you know, using a computer versus a piece of paper, you definitely want to have that behavior change. Let's see, you mentioned a list of 30+ change management methods and models. Are you able to share them with us? No, I can't share them with you because I was part of a confidential working group for someone's client who pulled that together, but globally, that's the list we came up with. Let's see, anything else? Anything else? Okay. Well, thank you for your time, and I hope this was a very helpful webinar. And again, you can email me at teresa@changemanagementreview.com if you're interested in learning more about being part of our pool of beta companies who are going to try our new COEIP. Okay, take care, everyone.